The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 51, the commodification of lust. Welcome back to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. This episode takes us into one of the most volatile and distorted corners of the collective shadow, lust. But here, lust isn't just about intimacy or attraction. It's about what happens when desire itself is packaged, sold, and consumed, not only through sexuality, but through every system that thrives on craving. We live in a culture where lust has been industrialized. Porn platforms generate billions. Advertising seduces us with half-clothed bodies to sell perfume and cars. Social media turns desirability into performance, measured in likes, shares, and followers. But the same circuitry shows up beyond sex. Online poker booms, crypto trading frenzies, and high-leverage speculation use the same loops of risk and reward to hook us. Desire becomes gamified, engineered to keep us hungry. The cost is profound. Desire that once carried intimacy, creativity, or awe now becomes performance, comparison, and transaction. The thrill is real, but so is the emptiness afterward. What once belonged to the sacred and the private is repackaged as spectacle, where even our hunger for aliveness is commodified. In this conversation, we'll explore how lust and risk itself are turned into products, how these loops alter the way we relate to ourselves and others, and how entire industries profit from our most basic instincts. Along the way, I'll share reflections from my own life, from how advertising and porn culture shaped my early sense of self, to the rush and collapse of online poker and crypto trading, and the lessons hidden inside those cycles of craving and crash. Because when desire stops being human and becomes commodity, it doesn't just change how we see sex. It changes how we see risk, aliveness, and ourselves. Let's begin. The market of desire. Sex sells has been said so often it's almost cliche. But the truth is more unsettling. It isn't just that products use sex to sell, it's that lust itself has become the product. Pornography platforms are among the largest industries in the world, drawing more revenue annually than many entertainment giants combined. Fashion and lifestyle brands frame their campaigns not around clothes or objects, but around fantasies. Social media has accelerated this further, where desirability itself, the pose, the image, the filtered body, becomes a commodity in an attention economy. Lust turned into product. What once belonged to private encounters has been externalized and staged. Desire is curated, packaged, endlessly available, and algorithmically distributed. It's not just intensified, it's hollowed out. We are trained to crave, but not necessarily to connect. Attributes of commodified lost disembodiment, desire detached from lived intimacy. Spectacle, sexuality packaged for display and performance. Consumption, lust presented as an endlessly repeatable product. Comparison, self-worth tied to external standards and images. Alienation, authentic connection displaced by performance. Themes, desire as commodity. Pornography at scale. Unprecedented access to sexual imagery creates novelty addiction, rewiring desire away from intimacy and toward endless newness. Advertising and branding, lust deployed to sell unrelated products, shaping unconscious associations. Perfume equals seduction, cars equal conquest, beauty equals worth. Social media economy, desirability measured in likes and shares. Sexuality is curated into performance rather than lived intimacy. The unsatisfied hunger, commodified lust thrives on absence. It never fulfills its promise. It keeps us scrolling, buying, consuming. Personal reflection. I can remember when I first began to realize how much sexuality was shaping advertising. It was everywhere. Half-dressed models selling aftershave, music videos drenched in innuendo, magazines lining corner shops with airbrushed perfection. Even products that had nothing to do with intimacy were tied to sexual promise. At the time, I didn't question it. I absorbed the message like everyone else. Attractiveness equals value, sexuality equals success. But over time, I noticed something subtle happening inside me. Desire stopped being about connection, about curiosity, about real intimacy. It started to feel external, as though my worth depended on how well I compared to the images surrounding me. Relationships, too, carried this silent weight. Standards became warped, shaped less by what I genuinely felt and more by the manufactured fantasies I consumed. And the strangest part was that I thought it was me, that my desires were natural, instinctive, authentically mine. It wasn't until later, when I reflected critically, that I realized how much of it was scripted. The realization was jarring. Lust, something so deeply personal, wasn't just mine. It had been shaped, commodified, and sold back to me in polished fragments of fantasy. And the cost wasn't just confusion, it was alienation, a disconnection from intimacy that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Psychological insight, desire as social construction psychology and sociology both confirm what I lived. Lust is not simply instinct. It is also shaped, directed, and framed by the culture around us. Cultural theorists like Jean Baudrillard argued that advertising doesn't just sell objects, it sells desire itself. A bottle of perfume isn't just scent, it's a fantasy of being irresistible. Pornography doesn't just depict sex, it scripts it, teaching us what bodies should look like, how encounters should unfold, and what counts as satisfying. Neuroscience reinforces this. Studies on dopamine and novelty show that constant exposure to curated sexual imagery creates craving loops. Each new click promises satisfaction, but like any addictive cycle, the craving remains unsatisfied, requiring more novelty to feel the same charge. In my own experience, this rings painfully true. What I thought was authentic attraction often turned out to be imitation, a reflection of what I'd absorbed from images, adverts, and scripts I never consciously chose. My desire was less about what I wanted and more about what I had been trained to want. Recognizing that was the first step to reclaiming it. Embodiment prompt or practice. Take 10 minutes this week to notice where commodified lust appears in your daily life, adverts, social media, films. Pause and ask yourself, is this arousing desire or scripting it? Does this image bring me closer to my own body and connection, or further into comparison and craving? Write down one moment where you felt the difference. Integration moment. The commodification of lust shows us that desire is no longer only ours. It is packaged, curated, and sold. This doesn't mean intimacy is lost forever, but it means we have to consciously reclaim it. Seeing how desire has been shaped is the first step toward freeing it. Seed to plant this week. When you encounter lust packaged as a product, pause. Ask yourself, what does my real body want? Not the image, not the fantasy, but me. Ancient dangers. Sacred rights. Every society has known that lust is volatile. Left unbound, it can disrupt families, destabilize communities, even unravel social order. So cultures didn't leave it to chance. They created rituals, prohibitions, and sacred channels to contain its fire. Containing the fire desire wasn't seen as private appetite. It was framed as communal energy, one that demanded reverence and responsibility. Fertility rites, initiation ceremonies, and strict taboos existed not only to repress lust, but to weave it into the survival of the group. Attributes of ritualized desire ordeal, thresholds where sexual energy was tested or endured. Containment, boundaries that protected intimacy and lineage. Communality, lust framed as part of family, tribe survival. Transcendence, sexuality lifted into sacred or spiritual practice. Responsibility, desire tied to continuity, care, and order. Themes, desire as sacred fire, fertility, and lineage in ancient Egypt. Fertility festivals linked sexuality to the flooding of the Nile and the renewal of crops. Desire wasn't indulgence, it was participation in the cosmic cycle of survival. Ritual prohibitions. Among the Maasai, age-set rituals included strict boundaries around sexual behavior, recognizing that uncontained lust could fracture community roles. Restraint became part of initiation into adulthood. Sacred sexuality. In certain tantric traditions, desire was framed as divine energy, not repressed but channeled toward union with the sacred. Here lust wasn't base, it was cosmic. Shame as control, medieval Christianity turned lust into sin, embedding it in guilt. The energy wasn't honored but feared, disciplined through confession and penance. Across traditions, one truth remained. Lust had to be held. Ignored or trivialized, it threatened to burn too hot. Personal reflection. When I think about ritual containment of lust, I'm struck by the absence of anything like it in my own upbringing. Lust was never spoken about with reverence or wisdom. It was either avoided altogether or reduced to crude jokes. That silence meant that by the time I first encountered desire, I had no framework to hold it. Media filled the gap, adverts, films, music videos, but nothing grounded. There were rules, yes, avoid pregnancy, don't cause scandal, but no deeper conversation about what lust actually meant, how to carry it responsibly, or how it could be honored. Looking back, I see how much of my early experience with sexuality was shaped by this void. Without ritual or guidance, lust became something both fascinating and shameful, something to be explored in secret rather than carried openly. And in that secrecy, it often became distorted. I sometimes wonder how different it might have been if there had been more honest communal wisdom. Instead of stumbling alone, I could have seen desire not as something shameful, but as energy to be integrated, psychological insight, boundaries, and the human drive psychology affirms what ancient cultures seemed to know intuitively. Powerful drives require boundaries to flourish. Without containment, they consume. With it, they can transform. Freud recognized this in his theory of sublimation, the redirection of sexual energy into art, creativity, or cultural achievement. Jung echoed it, seeing sexuality as archetypal energy that, when contained, could fuel individuation and growth. More contemporary research backs this up. Anthropologist Mary Douglas argued that taboo functions to protect what is sacred by marking its boundaries. Similarly, developmental psychology shows that young people who lack cultural or familial guidance around sexuality are more vulnerable to exploitation, compulsivity, and distorted expectations. Tolman, 2002. For me, the absence of ritual meant that lust ran unchecked in some areas and suppressed in others. It wasn't until much later that I began to see desire as energy that needed framing, not indulgence or denial. In that sense, the wisdom of ritual wasn't just cultural, it was psychological, embodiment, prompt, or practice. Think back to the first time you became aware of lust as more than curiosity. Who framed it for you, family, culture, peers, or media? Was it treated as sacred energy, dangerous temptation, or casual indulgence? How has that framing shaped your relationship with desire today? Write down one boundary or ritual you wish had been present to guide you, and consider how you might create it now for yourself. Integration moment. Ancient cultures knew what modern ones forget. Lust is fire. Without a container, it burns. Within the container, it illuminates. The challenge today is not to copy old rites, but to recover the wisdom they carried, to treat desire with dignity, not just indulgence or shame. Seed to plant this week. When lust arises, instead of suppressing or indulging it, pause. Ask, what container does this energy need right now? Silence, honesty, creativity, intimacy. Lust is neither commodity nor curse. It is energy waiting for shape, risk packaged as reward. Where ancient cultures treated lust as sacred fire, dangerous but also potentially transformative, modern culture has found new ways to exploit it. Today, risk itself is commodified. Hookup apps, porn platforms, and online gambling operate on the same psychological circuitry, engineered loops of novelty, anticipation, and dopamine. Lust as gamified experience. Lust is no longer just a human drive. It's a gamified experience, complete with flashing lights, variable rewards, and the lure of just one more. Risk has been rebranded as reward, but the reward rarely arrives. What we get instead is the cycle, craving, escalation, disappointment that keeps us clicking, swiping, and paying. In this system, risk doesn't open us to transformation. It locks us into repetition. Attributes of gamified lost thrill, the buzz of novelty, chance, and anticipation. Risk, exposure to rejection, loss, or collapse, but without grounding or meaning. Compulsion, systems engineered for endless repetition, not satisfaction. Simulation, surface intimacy, and performance replace depth. Emptiness, temporary highs give way to lingering hollowness. Themes: the slot machine of desire. Hookup apps as casinos, swiping mirrors slot machine psychology, variable rewards, unpredictability, the intoxicating thought that the next one could be it. Desire becomes gamified, detached from human presence. Pornography and escalation, exposure rewires dopamine systems. What once aroused now feels dull, leading to more extreme searches. Intimacy is replaced by escalation. Gambling and risk economies, the same dynamics govern poker tables and betting sites. The thrill of risk is captured, repackaged, and sold back. The house always wins, not because the player doesn't, but because the system thrives on keeping us hungry. The hollow center. None of these loops are designed to fulfill. They are designed to sustain craving. Hunger becomes the product. Personal reflection: I've lived these loops in different ways. In the mid 2000s, hookup sites were just starting to take off. The promise was intoxicating: instant connection, no strings attached, the thrill of meeting someone who wanted the same thing. I signed up, met someone, and the rush was undeniable. It felt exciting, even dangerous, stepping into a world of risk, secrecy, and lust. But almost immediately afterward, I was left with emptiness. Shame crept in. What had felt like freedom in the moment became hollow in reflection. I met the same person again, and it drifted into something like casual dating. But deep down, I knew I wasn't looking for commitment. I wasn't even looking for intimacy. I was avoiding loneliness, chasing the thrill of desire without roots. The other person wanted more, and when I pulled back, I left not just them, but myself with regret. Looking back now, I see that I wasn't just lost in my own shadow. I was also caught in a cultural loop, a system that thrives on offering risk without reverence, thrill without grounding. And it wasn't just lust where I encountered this. Around the same time, I got caught up in the online poker boom. I remember the first time I stumbled across the World Poker Tour on TV. The stacks of cash in the middle of the table, the tension in every hand. I felt the buzz instantly. I set myself the challenge of learning to play, and soon I was entering online tournaments, sometimes lasting 15 hours straight. The rush was extraordinary. Reading players, bluffing successfully, watching chips slide across the table, it was intoxicating. I had moments of triumph too. I once turned £10 on a very small stakes table into £500 in a single morning, only to lose it all 20 minutes later to a bad beat. The high of pulling off a perfect bluff or placing well in a huge tournament was real. I won several low-stakes tournaments with fields of 500 to 4,000 online players, and one of the biggest events I entered. I finished 17th out of 28,000 players in a major online championship through PokerStars, but the lows were brutal. Losing streaks, the grind of endless play, the frustration of watching chance overturn skill, it all took its toll. In both Lost and Poker, the pattern was the same. Thrill in the beginning, emptiness at the end. Wins came, yes, but they never outweighed the grind, the losses, or the hollowness. What I thought was freedom was actually a system, engineered to keep me hungry, to make me play again, to feed desire without ever satisfying it. Looking back, I see these not just as personal struggles, but as cultural scripts. Lust, risk, aliveness, all of them are packaged into products. They promise intensity, but what they really sell is the loop. Psychological insight, dopamine, tech, and the illusion of reward psychology make sense of what I lived. B.F. Skinner's work on variable rewards showed that when outcomes are unpredictable, behavior becomes compulsive. This is why slot machines are addictive, why swiping on apps feels irresistible, why online poker can keep you at the screen for hours. You never know when the win or the match will come. Neuroscience confirms it. Novelty-driven experiences hijack dopamine systems, creating a cycle of craving without fulfillment. We feel the rush, but not the nourishment. More novelty is needed, but satisfaction never lands. Zimbardo's research into porn culture shows how this can lead to arousal addiction, not addiction to sex itself, but to novelty, to escalation, to the next hit. Gambling studies echo the same. The thrill of winning is outweighed by the grind of chasing losses. I recognize myself in this research. The hookup site encounters, the poker tournaments, the lure of risk, they all carried the same structure. The system wasn't designed to give me intimacy, presence, or even financial stability. It was designed to keep me inside the loop. And that's the heart of commodified lust and risk alike. They offer the thrill of aliveness, but strip away the grounding that makes it real. What's left is repetition, craving, and emptiness. Embodiment prompt or practice this week. Notice one place where desire feels like compulsion. It might be lust, gambling, scrolling, or even shopping. Pause and ask, am I chasing connection or am I chasing novelty? Do I feel nourished afterward or hollow? What would it look like to pause and listen rather than click or swipe again? Write down the difference between craving and connection in your own life. Integration moment, commodified lost, and commodified risk share the same design. They promise aliveness, but deliver hunger. They package risk as reward, But without reverence, the thrill collapses into emptiness. The challenge isn't to reject desire or risk altogether, but to reclaim them, to step out of the loops that are engineered to exploit us, and to ask where real connection, real aliveness can be found. Seed to plant next time you feel the pull of risk, whether in lust, gambling, or thrill seeking. Pause. Ask, is this opening me or just looping me? Choosing awareness in that moment is how we begin to reclaim desire as human, not commodity. The culture of risk and reward, if lust has been turned into a commodity, it has also been turned into a market. Modern culture doesn't just commodify sex, it applies the same logics of risk, reward, and speculation across everything. Hookup apps mimic slot machines, poker tables simulate life or death stakes, and financial markets gamify wealth until it feels like a roller coaster of adrenaline and collapse. When desire becomes speculation, at the heart of it all is the same circuitry, the human craving for intensity. Lust is no longer only about the body. It is about the rush of risk, the hunger for more, the illusion of mastery over forces that are never fully ours. Attributes of the risk-reward culture: adrenaline, the thrill of being on the edge; escalation, needing more novelty, higher stakes, bigger wins; volatility, unpredictable highs and brutal collapses; euphoria, the intoxicating sense of invincibility in the win; crash, emptiness, loss, or regret in the aftermath. Themes: risk as cultural commodity. The gamification of desire, sex, gambling, trading, and even social media all use the same psychology of variable reward. Keep playing, keep scrolling, keep risking. Eros and finance. Financial markets have long borrowed the language of lust. Bulls, bears, penetration, seduction of risk. The rush of speculation is erotic in its intensity. Volatility as entertainment. From reality TV to crypto pumps, we are trained to crave volatility itself. The win is fleeting. The real product is the cycle of hope and collapse. The commodification of aliveness. Risk has always been part of being human, but in this cultural form, it's packaged into loops that sell us the rush while draining the substance. Personal reflection: I learned this not just through intimacy or hookup culture, but through risk itself. Years later, I found myself in a different arena, but with the same pulse: trading. I started small, £50 in a trading account, and slowly built it into more than £25,000 with leveraged lines that could stretch over £250,000. My best day came when I caught the launch of Pepe Coin. The rush was beyond anything I'd felt before. I turned £75 into $16,000 in a single afternoon. But the cost was equally visceral. On one trade, I had $4,000 at stake. The price swung violently, and for nearly 2 hours I sat frozen, heart pounding out of my chest, praying it would recover before liquidation wiped me out. It did swing back, and I closed the trade in profit. But I'll never forget the feeling, the rush of life and death over a few pixels on a screen. Looking back, I see the same dynamics in poker, trading, hookups, the lure of risk without grounding. It feels like aliveness, but it often leaves emptiness or regret. The adrenaline is real, the dopamine is real, but it doesn't nourish. It consumes. Psychological insight. The erotic logic of risk psychologists and sociologists now argue that lust, gambling, and speculation operate on the same circuitry. Variable rewards. B.F. Skinner's experiments revealed that unpredictable outcomes are the most addictive. Slot machines, swiping on apps, refreshing stock charts all mirror this design. The maybe next one is the hook. Neuroeconomics of risk. Brain imaging studies show that financial speculation lights up the same reward pathways as sexual arousal. Dopamine floods during risk, creating euphoria, but quickly crashes into withdrawal when the reward vanishes. Flow and collapse. Mihali's theory of flow explains why people lose hours at poker tables or trading screens. High-stakes risk demands total focus. But without integration, the state flips from flow to compulsion. The erotics of finance. Scholars like Paul Crosthwaite argue that a modern finance uses the same metaphors as desire. Seduction, penetration, climax, loss. Speculation is not just economic, it's libidinal, playing with the same energies as lust. When I think back on those moments, the hook of poker, the rush of trading, the lure of hookups, I see now that they weren't separate. They were different faces of the same shadow. My body and mind were caught in loops designed for hunger, not fulfillment. What felt like freedom was, in many ways, captivity dressed as thrill. Embodiment prompt or practice this week. Notice where risk shows up in your life. Is it in intimacy, in money, in ambition? Does it feel like connection or like compulsion? Write down one time you felt the rush of risk and then the crash that followed. Ask yourself, was this real aliveness or just volatility sold back to me as a thrill? Integration moment risk has always been part of life. But in modern culture, it's no longer an ordeal or initiation, it's a spectacle. The thrill is packaged, sold, repeated, until what once was sacred becomes hollow. Yet risk itself is not the enemy. When held with reverence, it sharpens presence, deepens connection, and awakens awe. The challenge is to reclaim risk from its commodified form, to step out of the loop of thrill and crash, and to reroute desire in something that nourishes. Seed to plant this week. When you feel the lure of risk, whether in intimacy, money, or even scrolling, pause. Ask, am I chasing aliveness or am I just feeding a machine? Real risk, the kind that transforms, is not a transaction. It is presence, identity, intimacy, and alienation. The commodification of loss doesn't just affect how we look at others, it reshapes how we see ourselves. When desire distorts selfhood, when desire is packaged and sold, our own bodies become part of the marketplace, judged, compared, displayed, or found wanting. Instead of intimacy, we learn performance. Instead of authenticity, we learn mimicry. The result is a subtle alienation, not only from partners but from our own skin. Attributes of alienated desire objectification, reducing self or others to bodies for consumption. Comparison, identity tied to external standards of desirability. Insecurity, chronic self-surveillance, the body as project. Mimicry, learned scripts replace authentic intimacy. Loneliness, connection undermined by performance and alienation. Themes, desire's impact on identity, body image, and media. Research shows repeated exposure to sexualized advertising and pornography reshapes self-image. We compare ourselves to airbrushed ideals, leaving even the most confident feeling inadequate. Scripts of intimacy. Pornography doesn't just sex, it teaches scripts. What to say, how to act, what counts as real. Many people report feeling pressured to perform these roles rather than explore their own desires. Alienation in relationships. When intimacy becomes performance, connection suffers. People may be physically close yet emotionally disconnected, each comparing themselves to fantasies rather than being present with each other. Personal reflection. I remember moments in my younger years where intimacy felt less like exploration and more like performance. Without guidance or ritual, the models I absorbed came mostly from culture, advertising, films, and the occasional exposure to pornography. These scripts left me believing intimacy had to look a certain way, sound a certain way, and follow a formula. That pressure quietly followed me into relationships. Instead of being fully present, I sometimes found myself wondering if I was good enough or if I measured up. The body wasn't just mine anymore. It was a comparison point against images I'd seen on screens and billboards. Even when a partner was happy, I felt haunted by silent metrics I didn't choose. There were also moments where connection broke down. I can recall being with someone and realizing we were both acting more than relating, both trying to embody an image of what sex was supposed to look like, rather than actually being with each other. It wasn't until later in life, after reflecting more deeply, that I began to understand how profoundly commodified lust had shaped not only my view of others, but my own identity. The intimacy was real in flashes, but often clouded by mimicry and comparison. Psychological insight, objectification, and the alienated self-psychologist Barbara Fredrickson and Tommy Ann Roberts developed objectification theory, 1997, showing how constant sexualization leads individuals, especially women but increasingly men, to internalize the observer's gaze. The self becomes both subject and object, always seen, always judged. This results in body surveillance, shame, and reduced capacity for authentic intimacy. Self-discrepancy theory, Higgins, 1987, explains the alienation further when the real self and the ideal self, often shaped by media, diverge too far, anxiety, shame, and dissatisfaction follow. In a culture where commodified lust amplifies impossible ideals, this gap widens constantly. Neuroscience adds another layer. Research into porn-induced sexual dysfunction, Park et al., 2016, shows that excessive consumption of scripted sexual content can reduce arousal in real intimacy. Desire becomes attached to novelty and fantasy rather than presence and relationship. For me, these insights resonated when I realized how much of my insecurity came not from partners, but from internalized comparisons. I wasn't just measuring myself against reality, I was measuring myself against fantasy. And fantasy, polished by industry and repetition, always wins. It took years of unlearning to begin letting go of those silent comparisons and return to intimacy as something lived, not performed. Embodiment prompt or practice. This week, notice moments where you feel self-conscious in your body, whether alone or with another. Ask yourself, whose gaze am I carrying right now? Is this my own desire or a script I've absorbed? What happens if I let go of the performance, even for a moment? Write down what shifts when you focus not on comparison, but on presence. Integration moment. The commodification of lust creates alienation because it makes us actors in someone else's script. Intimacy becomes performance, the self becomes an object, and relationships become mirrors of media. But intimacy is not found in performing the perfect role. It is found in the messy, vulnerable, embodied presence of two people who stop comparing and start being. Seed to plant this week: when you feel insecurity or self-comparison rising, pause and breathe. Remind yourself, I'm not an image. I'm a body, a presence, a human being. Desire doesn't need to be performed, it needs to be lived. Psychological insights: lust, power, and society. When lust is commodified, it stops being personal. It becomes systemic, woven into economies, politics, advertising, and even social hierarchies. This isn't just about individuals making choices. It's about industries, ideologies, and algorithms shaping those choices before we're even aware of them. Beyond the bedroom, into the system, to understand the commodification of lust, we need to move beyond the psychology of the individual and into the psychology of the system, the way desire, power, and society feed into each other. Attributes of systemic lust: manipulation, desire used to control behavior. Hierarchy, attractiveness coded as power, exclusion as weakness. Economy, sexuality monetized in industries and platforms. Surveillance, constant visibility through media and self-display. Fragmentation, intimacy replaced with consumption and comparison. Themes: the social psychology of desire, lust, and power. Michel Foucault famously argued that sexuality is never separate from power. Institutions regulate it, markets exploit it, and individuals internalize it. Desire becomes a tool for both discipline and profit. Status and envy. Studies on mating markets, Buss 2016, show that people unconsciously use signals of sexuality and desirability to compete for status. Social media amplifies this, turning dating, attractiveness, and desirability into endless contests of display. The digital panopticon. With platforms like Instagram and TikTok, bodies are not only sexualized but constantly visible. Surveillance psychology, drawing on Foucault's panopticon, suggests that when we think we are always being watched, we self-police. Desire becomes curated before it's even expressed. Alienation at scale. The result is a society of disconnection. People perform desirability for strangers while struggling with loneliness and intimacy in private. Personal reflection. I've seen these dynamics not just in myself, but around me, especially as technology accelerated. Social media in the 2010s made visibility everything. Suddenly, worth was tied to how you presented, how many likes you received, how desirable you appeared to others. I noticed how easily I got drawn into it. Even when I wasn't consciously posting, there was a silent pressure to compare myself, to measure my worth against curated snapshots of other people's lives. The same pressures I'd first absorbed from advertising years before were now amplified 100-fold, carried into my pocket by an algorithm. And beneath it all, there was something I recognized: power. Those who could perform desirability gained attention, status, opportunity. Those who couldn't or wouldn't often felt left behind. Lust, no longer private or intimate, had become a hierarchy, another ladder to climb, another contest to lose. It wasn't just confusing. At times it felt crushing. I remember reflecting during this period that intimacy, real, vulnerable intimacy, was becoming rarer. people were performing connections rather than living it, and I could see it in myself too, the way I sometimes measured my value through others' eyes rather than my own. That realization was uncomfortable but necessary. It revealed that lust, commodified at scale, was not neutral, it was systemic. It shaped how we related not just to sex, but to selfhood, power, and belonging. Psychological insight, desire as social currency, contemporary psychology reinforces this. Evolutionary psychology shows that displays of attractiveness function as status signals. But in commodified culture, these signals are exaggerated, gamified, and endlessly broadcast. Instead of fostering intimacy, they foster competition. Social comparison theory, Festinger 1954, explains how constant exposure to idealized bodies fuels dissatisfaction. Studies show that time on Instagram is strongly correlated with body image anxiety and reduced self-esteem. Behavioral economics reveals how industries exploit these vulnerabilities. Attention markets thrive on keeping us dissatisfied, whether through advertising, pornography, or dating apps. The business model depends on craving that never resolves. Cultural psychology suggests that when desire is framed as a commodity, it shifts identity itself. Instead of I am who I am, it becomes I am what I project. For me, the personal and the cultural overlapped. I didn't choose to see desire as a commodity, but I absorbed it. What I thought were private struggles with lust or insecurity were actually echoes of a wider system, a system designed to shape how I saw myself and others. Once I saw that, the shame softened. It wasn't just me failing, it was a culture profiting from disconnection. Embodiment prompt or practice this week. Notice when desire shows up as comparison or currency. Do I feel enough or not enough based on how others see me? Am I performing attraction or living intimacy? What happens if I step out of the performance, even briefly? Take one moment each day to catch yourself in the act of self-surveillance. Pause, breathe, and remind yourself, desire doesn't need an audience. Integration moment. The commodification of lust reveals how personal struggles are often systemic ones. We don't just wrestle with our own desires, we wrestle with industries, algorithms, and ideologies that shape them. Seeing this clearly isn't about despair. It's about reclaiming agency. When we stop confusing performance for intimacy, comparison for connection, we begin to step out of the machine. Seed to plant this week. Choose one area where you normally feel pressured to perform desirability online, at work, in social spaces. Experiment with authenticity instead of performance. Notice what shifts when you stop treating desire as currency and start treating it as human. Living with lust in a commodified age. If lust is energy, then the challenge of our time is not that we feel it, but that we live in a culture determined to hijack it. Every advert, every algorithm, every platform tells us what to want and how to perform it. Carrying fire without being consumed lust is no longer private, it's public property. The question is, how do we carry this fire without letting it burn us hollow? How do we reclaim intimacy and aliveness when everything around us pushes us toward performance, consumption, and endless craving? Attributes of living with lust awareness, seeing when desire is scripted, not authentic. Boundaries, choosing where to direct attention and energy. Integration, recognizing lust as part of wholeness, not enemy or addiction. Resilience, resisting comparison and systemic pressure. Creativity, transforming desire into intimacy, art, or vitality. Themes, beyond commodity, toward wholeness. The system won't stop. Porn industries, advertising, and platforms will not stop packaging lust. The responsibility is ours to reclaim it. From performance to presence, moving away from desirability as image into intimacy as experience. Risk reframed, desire will always involve risk, rejection, vulnerability, intensity. But risk can be sacred when held with awareness, not hollow when chased for thrill alone. Desire as energy, rather than repressing lust or indulging it blindly, we can treat it as energy to be directed into love, into creativity, into connection. Personal reflection. Looking back over my own life, I can see how often I chased desire through systems designed to profit from it. In the mid-2000s, online poker hooked me with the same rush as lust. The thrill of risk, the high of a big win, the crushing blow of a bad beat, all of it mirrored the cycle of craving and collapse. The adrenaline was real, but so was the emptiness afterward. I'd win £500 in the morning and lose it all in 20 minutes. The pattern was clear. The system was built not for fulfillment, but for hunger. Later, I felt a similar rush when I began trading crypto and stocks. On one occasion, I leveraged a small stake into a staggering profit within hours. The rush was so intense my heart pounded out of my chest. I sat there, praying the numbers would swing back in my favor. And they did. I closed the trade in profit, but even in victory, I realized something. The cycle never really ended. The hunger wasn't satisfied, it was amplified. Lust worked in much the same way. Whether through advertising, hookup culture, or pornography, the structure was identical. Desire amplified, but never grounded. Thrill delivered, but intimacy absent. Looking back, I can see how I often mistook that hunger for aliveness. But real life doesn't come from constant craving. It comes from presence, from risking intimacy, creativity, vulnerability in ways that nourish, not deplete. Those experiences taught me something uncomfortable but liberating. The system profits when we mistake intensity for meaning. But if we stop, even for a moment, to reclaim our desire, we begin to see it differently. Lust isn't an enemy or addiction, it's energy. And energy, when directed with awareness, doesn't just burn, it creates. Psychological insight, addiction, agency, and aliveness research on behavioral addiction shows that gambling, trading, pornography, and social media all exploit the same psychological loops. Variable rewards, novelty, and intermittent reinforcement keep us chasing the next high. These cycles hijack dopamine, creating craving without closure. But psychology also points to the possibility of agency. Studies on self-determination theory, Deshi and Ryan 1985, show that when our basic needs for autonomy, competence, and connection are met, compulsive craving diminishes. We don't need endless novelty when we feel authentic belonging. Neuroscience of Awe, Keltner and Haidt, 2003, also suggests that true aliveness comes not from craving, but from connection, to nature, to intimacy, to something larger than ourselves. Awe calms the ego, expands perspective, and grounds desire in reverence. For me, those poker tables and crypto trades were training grounds in seeing the pattern. The thrill wasn't the problem. The problem was mistaking the thrill for meaning. The same applies to lust. When commodified, it traps us in cycles of hunger. When reclaimed, it can awaken creativity, intimacy, and awe. Embodiment prompt or practice this week. Notice when you feel the rush of desire in sexuality, in risk, in craving. Pause and ask, is this feeding me or draining me? If it's draining, try redirecting that energy. Go for a run. Write. Create. Reach out to someone you love. Notice how desire, when rechanneled, transforms from hunger into vitality. Integration moment living with lust in a commodified age means refusing to hand our desire over to systems designed to exploit it. It means carrying fire with care, not repressing it, not indulging blindly, but holding it with presence. Lust is not the enemy, commodity is. And the antidote to commodification is intimacy, with ourselves, with others, with life. Seed to plant this week. Choose one moment where you feel pulled into craving, whether through an advert, an app, or a rush. Instead of following it, pause. Ask, what am I really longing for beneath this hunger? Then take one small step toward that real need. Final words. We've explored lust not as something purely personal, but as something shaped, packaged, and sold at every level of our culture. From the billboards and algorithms that script our desires, to the systems that turn risk into entertainment and intimacy into transaction, the pattern is clear. The hunger never ends because it was never meant to. And yet lust itself is not the enemy. It is energy, a force as old as humanity, capable of burning us hollow or igniting us into deeper intimacy, creativity, and aliveness. The challenge of our time is to reclaim that energy from systems that profit by keeping us craving and to redirect it into presence, connection, and meaning. As always, the work begins close to home. To notice where desire feels like compulsion, to pause before the next click or swipe, and to ask, what am I really longing for? When we do that, lust stops being commodity and becomes human again, messy, sacred, and alive. You've been listening to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. If you found something here that resonated, sit with it, let it move through you, and if it feels right, share it with someone who might also need to hear it. Until next time, stay human, stay awake. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of The Inversiverse, a journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 The Simulated Self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 The Spell of the Mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 Conscious Seduction journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 The Myth of Sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 The Algorithmic Mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 The Noise of Knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 Belief Machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 Submerged Signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 The Alchemy Within Traces, Food, Frequency, and the Forgotten Intelligence of the Body. Episode 20 Encoded Flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.